10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 413. Hey, everybody, welcome back to episode 413 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. So we've been talking about giant steps all month, and we're going to kind of conclude this with our tune of the month that we typically do, where I write an etude that kind of brings things together, hopefully for something that we've been working on. And this month is going to be no different. I've prepared a 3-chorus etude for you over giant steps, sort of encompassing all of the ideas that we've talked about. So let's do a quick review of some of the stuff that we've talked about. So in episode 1 of this series, we talked about breaking giant steps down to just 3 major key centers. And we worked on those 3 key centers and kind of used them to simplify a lot, to take the intimidation factor, the famously intimidating tune of giant steps, and make it a little bit simpler and sort of prove that we don't need nearly as much information as is typically on the page to be able to play something quality over a tune like this. So 3 major keys and sort of figuring out where they fall and practicing coming up with a quality solo statement just using the expression of a major scale. Then in the second episode of the series, we took the second half and we started injecting some 5-to-1 motion. And what that did was it got us to play some new shapes, some different shapes, because now we were considering those 5 chords, and we were also considering the gravity that comes from considering the 5 chord moving into the 1 chord. But over the first half of the tune, we were still thinking about just those major key centers. And then what we finally did in last week's episode was we started to fill everything in the first half, but we limited ourselves to only triads. And I hope that a bunch of you really worked on that and you realized how powerful just using the triads can be. That's like a really, really important thing to realize, is that we don't need to be playing all this crazy chromaticism, and that in a tune like this, the chord progression is really the interesting part. So all we need to do is be able to follow that chord progression and harness the power of it. But we can use something really super simple, like triads, that doesn't break our brain and doesn't, freeze us on the spot and go like, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how to connect these chords. Triads are really simple. And if you work on them slow, you could really start getting that happening fairly quickly. All right. So that's exactly what I've done with the etude this week. So I've done 3 choruses and I've gone through those 3 iterations. All right. So let's listen to the first chorus. If you're a Patreon member, go ahead, grab the PDF in your key and just follow along. You could either play along or you could just listen through. But this is going to be entirely just major key centers. And I'm staying 100% diatonic to the major scale of the moment as I go through this. So here's the first chorus. All right, so there you go. That's just only 3 major key centers, and I'm just manipulating that major scale in a way that I think sounds good. And I think you would agree, like that, if you played that on a gig, it would be okay. Nobody would be like, "Oh my gosh, did you hear that? That was so basic and dumb." No. In fact, nobody would ever say that. They would say, "Ah, that's pretty quality statement right there." All right. So there is the first chorus. Now, in the second chorus, what we did in the second half was we started considering those five chords. So what you'll notice and what you'll hear is that I'm doing some things in the second half that will really outline the five chord, using some sounds that I like to use over five chords. So like, flat nine, sharp nine, chromaticism, things like that that I actually practice over five chords. I'm actually starting to use that stuff because now the five chord is on the page and in my brain. So I feel a little bit more specific about my playing. And remember, that's not a good or a bad thing. It is just simply a thing. Now I'm considering those five chords and I'm using some sounds that I really love to use over five chords. A lot of people are probably sitting there arguing, like, well, I don't need to see the five chord to consider that stuff. Like, if I hear that it's tension moving into release, five moving into one, I just use it anyway. I don't even think about the five chord. That's cool too. The way that I think about it is I actually do think about that five chord. So here's the second chorus, and you will hear that I am reflecting some of that 5-1 movement in the second half. Remember, the first half is still just major key playing. All right, so there's the second chorus. Now, in the third chorus, I did exactly what I did in last week's episode, where over the first half, now I'm thinking just triads. But what you're going to hear is that now I'm really, really clearly and specifically outlining every single chord that Coltrane actually wrote over this tune, right? And what you're going to notice, I think, is that it is so clear. So if you took away the backing track, you would still be able to tell that it's Giant Steps. And that's another advantage that comes from, playing triadically, is it's super clear among the myriad of other advantages that come from only using triads. All right. So then in the second half, I'm still just thinking about 5-1. I'm not thinking about 2-5-1. So we haven't reached, the complete picture of this tune. But I actually don't even think you ever really need that two chord. I think if you think about 5-1, you're good. All right. So here's the third chorus, largely considering every chord in the tune. So there's your third chorus. Now, I want to say something. It's not that once you reach the third chorus and you're reflecting every chord, that's the way that you should play over the tune. There's a big sort of elephant in the room here that very often in jazz, it's always the more complicated, the better. But that is not true, right? You do not need to play over and consider every single chord. That is not the height of jazz expression. In fact, I would argue that a lot of musicians, maybe some of your favorite musicians, don't consider every chord, or they freely move between different modes of thinking about less chords, thinking about all the chords. They do what's appropriate, right? They're just kind of freely expressing themselves. And whether that means, oh, in order to freely express myself and play what I want to play, I consider every chord. Or in this instance, I'm thinking about one big key center for the entire tune. Could be any of those things. So just keep that in mind as a general thing. All right. So if you want a copy of the etude and me playing the etude so you can play along, consider supporting us on Patreon. We're a listener-supported podcast, and that means people just like you that make sure that the podcast keeps coming out and makes it possible for us to keep doing this. If you want more information about that, get signed up. It's just a small monthly fee. Go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, or go to patreon.com and search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Quick shout out to Keith for signing up this week to be a member of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson family. I hope you're enjoying all that stuff, Keith. And of course, to all the people that are over there supporting us and have been for years at this point, thank you. We could not do this without you. So again, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, or patreon.com, search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. All the information is over there, and you do get instant access as soon as you sign up. All right, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this series, and have a great weekend. Stay safe and healthy, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.